Welcome to this episode of YouTube, where I've entitled it An Early Melt. And anyone who's been following the weather patterns here in North America realizes that we've had a unusually warm February, and that resulted in a lot of snow melt, which filled the pond because the ground was still frozen. And so the pups found themselves in some kind of carcass bloody, a little bit funky water, and were allowed to interact with it. Because it's been damp and the snow is carrying a lot more moisture right now, we're continuing to use the bedding. And the pump housing is one area where the wolves get a high vantage point. And here's Denali kind of taking up space, taking up most of the pump housing, and everybody else is trying to get time up there as well. You'll notice that there's some vertebrae there. So one of the things about the cover hay is not only is it warmth, but it's great opportunity for caching things. So you always have to be careful that either a wolf or a human doesn't inadvertently put themselves in the middle of a cache. And here is Denali doing a threat display over that vertebrae that actually Axel is now laying on top of. Aiden comes up and does a standover on Axel, and there's been a little bit more dominance coming from Aiden towards Axel because there's a little bit more testing coming from Axel. But in this case, this is kind of a face-off between Aiden and Denali. Even though Denali's kind of got a right to guard and possess that food, Aiden doesn't take kindly to Denali giving him that lip curl. And so you can see Denali's ears went flat back and a little bit more intimidation. And then Bolts, once he hears conflict that involves the dominant male, he's pretty quick to show up to see if he can take advantage of Aiden. So that's kind of the winter scenario of dominance that we deal with here. Winter is always more dominant during this time of the year. There's a lot more rank order positioning, but as you can see, the pups aren't really involved with it much. There's Axel doing a chin rest on Denali, but as I said, a lot of this is food related. There's a lot of food, a lot of carcasses, things coming out of the snow that are individual wolves want to guard and possess. And so you have to be aware of, is this rank order tension or is this food related issues when you're watching these scenarios. So when we do wolf care, as I said, a human can get in the middle of a food defensive behavior just as much as another wolf can. It's very, very critical that we are always keyed into the ear posture of the wolf, the tail posture, the eye contact. Certainly their focus is our priority. So after the warm spell, it started to cool off again, and we're back to northern Minnesota February temperatures, highs in the 20 degrees, and that resulted in the pond icing over. And so, like I said, the cover hay helps. They do fall into the ice and get a little wet. They'll have that cover hay available to keep them dry. And this is just a little bit of that difference between Axel and Grayson. Grayson is standing up there. Axel's doing what we call obnoxious submission towards Denali. So Axel is much more likely to get engaged with the adult wolves, certainly to get in their face. Denali's got a vertebrae there. We saw him chewing on it, and Axel doesn't really care. He's just trying to go in on it and try to get possession of that vertebrae. Grayson has no desire to be involved in that. Once Aiden hears conflict, he typically comes up and tries to control whatever the conflict is, and you can see immediately Grayson submitted towards Aiden, had no engagement at all in that conflict, whereas Axel kind of backed off a little bit, then came right back up and did what he was doing. And that's Grayson coming over to the camera. Grayson being a little bit more timid, no doubt needing a little bit more reassurance from staff. So that's what winter's like. So lots of growling. Definitely the male rank order is strong. There's Bolts again coming up and trying to take advantage a little bit of Aiden. Aiden is clearly in charge, doing a standover on Denali there, and always watching Bolts. And that's been kind of the situation since I left for surgery on the 23rd of January. There was a little tension while I was gone between Bolts and Aiden, and I think that's kind of subsiding now that I'm back in the enclosure. So like I said, the ice doesn't necessarily support the wolves at this kind of depth. It was cool enough to ice over, but not enough to form ice. And you're going to see the wolves kind of digging around, doing a little bit of stiff leg jumps and breaking that ice and trying to see what else is floating to the surface in that spring melt. So that is what's going on here from the standpoint of wolf activity. And as you can see, we still have a lot of melt to go to get rid of all this snow. It's certainly going to be, another month yet before we probably see bare ground and within the enclosure. So, but it is a good time for the wolves to be stimulated, and that's the most important thing. Obviously, in captivity, we're always concerned about mental stimulus. We're concerned about rank. We're concerned about compatibility. We're concerned about safety. But we want to make sure that the wolves are stimulated and have those options for engaging in various things, and that's why trying to have as natural of exhibit as possible is important. And so here, what you may notice, this was actually the next day, a difference between an overnight thaw. So essentially what happened is the underground drain thawed overnight, dumped all the water out of the pond and left that sheet of ice to fall, and those ice chunks are now what are remaining in the pond, as well as, like I said, deer hides and things. So it doesn't take very long to thaw the ground once it has an opportunity, and that was, like say, an underground thaw, and that line comes underneath the building, so that's why it had a little bit more help in warming and thawing. So we're on the move. Certainly spring is just around the corner. This early warm temperatures made us a little excited, and certainly the pups got a little excited too. This is Grayson with a hide, and again, they're still pups. I mean, mentally, these wolves will not mature until about 18 to 24 months, so they'll still, even though they're getting bigger in size, they'll still have those moments when they act like juveniles, and that will be the nature of the next year. So over in retirement, one of the things I may have inadvertently referenced Grizzer, his situation with Luna, that he might be kind of afraid of Luna about food, and I didn't want to infer that Grizzer's terrified of Luna. By no means is he, in fear or anxious about living with Luna. There are moments when we're all concerned about Luna when she gets into her food possession, but the reality is we're seeing more and more of them in close proximity. And again, not pals, not necessarily of that nature of like you see with litter mates, but it's getting more comfortable for them to live together. And I didn't want to infer that just because Grizzer has some moments when Luna gets super possessive about food that he is in terror of her. He puts up with her, issues. We have now modified feeding, so we make sure that Grizzer has his own resources. But as you can see in this clip, even when she rolls some snow on him, she has her moments, but he's very able to defend himself and to let her know when she's inappropriate. So kicking snow in his face while he's sleeping there is not appropriate. But the other thing that we're noticing here is that their sleeping positions are getting closer and closer together, and we see a lot of this resting within several feet of each other, and certainly doing well. So just to remind people, why Luna is where she is right now is trying to continue to make her physically feel better. We are noticing in this warmer temperature she's a little bit more sore during this warmer temperature, meaning that the pain response is more problematic when it's warm than it is when it's cold. And I think that's probably anybody who has inflammation knows that ice packs are our friends. And probably the same thing is true for Luna. So we have to be very, very careful when we're doing body work. We need to, read her body language, to look at her ear postures. Is she relaxed? Is she, is there a pain response? Again, our job is to make her as comfortable as possible and try to help her feel as comfortable as possible. But we have to be very aware of the situation, again, how she's feeling, how she's responding to things, and all of the stimulus that's going on around her, whether it be the exhibit pack, whether it be Grizzer, whether it be ravens, whether it be doors being opened, etc. Those are all things that we want to be aware of to make sure. But this is typically the sign that she's relaxed, and so we are happy to report that she's continuing to get body work on a regular basis. So, like I said, a little bit of food possession yet. Grizzer, he's got his ways to just kind of avert gaze and go around her when she guards and possesses food. But there are times when, if we need to, we can separate them. Grizzer going back to the east side. As a matter of fact, this is one of the projects that the May Working for Wolves crew is going to be working on. we're going to improve this connection between the pack holding area on the east side. As you can see, as Grizzer walks through here, it's very compacted with snow and ice because they keep traveling through here. And if we ever had an emergency where we needed to immediately separate them, oftentimes that ice compaction is in the way. So we're going to try to shelter that a little bit better to give them that protection. Grizzer clearly raised leg urination, clearly confident, having good interactions with staff and really not having any issues. So I'm going to leave you with a slide here, and another fun way to help us teach the world about wolves is to score some points for Team Wolf in the Brackets for Good tournament. Much like a March Madness basketball tournament, the International Wolf Center is competing for a $10,000 prize in the Twin Cities bracket of this fundraising contest. So check out the action, get off the bench, and help us win for wolves. You'll see a link in the upper screen to connect directly to the Brackets for Good tournament. Thanks for watching.